we go, wait a minute, what's going on here?
Well, so so you're touching on the one of the overarching points of the webinar we just came out of, right?
Yeah.
Which is that new human intelligence, that
Mhm.
the way we practice human going forward is well beyond just conducting the interviews, is well
Exactly.
beyond writing transcripts, doing trade show intel. That literally, if we're talking about human in the loop, especially for any insights, intelligence, knowledge work, right? Anything that goes that goes into that kind of deeper um deeper level work. We need to ensure that a human is a part of the process, and not just human in the loop from a technical perspective,
Hmm.
but to have somebody or team with the process and intel skills and insights, that grounding of experience, to be able to say, this is what ultimately what we need to get out of whatever, if we're developing a system or if we're even doing incremental,
Exactly.
sort of targeted redesign here, in certain along certain tasks or workflows, or so forth. But you need to have that layer of human intelligence that is not just looking externally at the competitive space, but now you're training that intelligence internally to
Hmm.
scrutinize, to
Right.
provide that type of careful planning that
Hmm.
allows you to see the gaps, that allows you to see dependencies so you don't break anything. Should you
Yeah.
change, yeah, should you make any alterations or try to find efficiencies? It allows you to be able to understand what else can you get out of this. So what has been missing before that this thing can fill, right, et cetera. So you have to have the technical understanding. So there are many more facets here that humans can bring into this process,
Yeah.
where now we are applying intelligence on the human and on the intelligence, and
Right.
that should be the new human intelligence. So
Yes.
in that situation where the person was using Fable 5, then you would have the person, another person, or maybe this person, right, looking at this new use case, or looking at various novel tools coming in,
Hmm.
and being able to then add that human layer of scrutiny again, for the planning, for the design, right, for uh, quality assurance management, et cetera, right? That is that new intelligence, so that
Hmm.
as they're producing a new software product based on what's being reported in that interview or described in that interview, now you can apply also a human engineer, right,
Right.
to be able to validate that. And
There
so
needs to be that.
we need to think differently now, even with expanded capabilities, about how we redefine human intelligence,
Hmm.
and where it appears in the entire process. And I would argue it appears everywhere,
Right.
right?
It does. It does.
Gotta be
And
oversight.
if you just accept the assumptions that AI gives you without any confirmation, eventually you're going to have egg on your face. And I almost had egg on my face because the other company that we were studying had exactly what we thought they had. Uh, the this company, the one that didn't have it, uh, it was a shock. It was a complete shock to the client. They were like, "What do you mean they don't do that?" And they've been competing with these people for a long time, and they didn't know. So,
Would you say though that, because I know you can't reveal too much about it, you've got to
yeah,
mask it, right? Because as a matter of what we do. So, like, I don't want to prod too much about this, and and even kind of bring you up to the line. But are you so? But what you're describing, is that more of a typical situation that we tend to run up against, or was that novel to AI or AI adoption?
okay. So I think the issue basically was that it was something that almost all of the other competitors do. And so everyone assumed that they did it. But when I went in, so I went into the AI and it told me, yeah, it does this, 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 and this. Completely wrong. I mean, there was,
I see
there
what you're
was
saying. Yeah.
nothing there. But
Right.
I didn't know it until I talked to a former employee who was a human.
So I have a, so this is just kind of based on what we talked about also, and I keep going back to that webinar because we talked about quite a few things. But so in the webinar, when I hear about an AI failure, like I said, it goes into this whole branching where I think about, okay, what are the different potential points of failure?
I think it
And
wanted to
is
make me
it
happy.
so, but is it necessarily the AI, or is the way we prompt it, or the different tools and all that stuff? So I do think about that. So my question is,
Yeah.
I'm curious, which form of AI were you using in that case?
I believe that was Chat GPT, which is very low level.
Okay.
It probably wouldn't have happened like that, but I still think there would have been misses in terms of it's a secondary thing that they do, and it's they demo certain things, but they didn't demo this, and so the assumption could have been, well, because there's no demo, it doesn't happen, or
Yeah.
yes, it does happen, but we don't have a demo.
So
So
yeah, this is so great. I
yeah.
love this because this is gonna kind of, we're taking a few steps back in this discussion, right? But it's I think where we need to be. What you're describing is that this information was not publicly available. So AI could not, a Gen AI, right? At least
There's
this
nothing on
version,
the
yeah,
internet
that version of it could not have
whatsoever.
had that information because many of these tools also, um, a lot of these tools also, uh, can search in a limited fashion the open web, or the public body of knowledge, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're naturally going to hit that because there's not a single AI model that I'm aware of anyway, um, that is absolutely up to date, that is
Mm-hmm.
also extremely robust. Yeah, we can say, okay, Gemini, Chrome, it can search the web, blah, blah, blah. But we also run into a robustness issue, right? In the way that it can analyze is not as powerful. The ones who are powerful in terms of what it's able to do performance wise, they don't have the corpus, right? The current corpus to draw on. So when we're talking about that rarefied, the leading edge, most current information that could also just be up here, that's
Mm-hmm.
still traditional human, is what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah. And a lot of people could have been busy and said, okay, well, it says it's there, so it must be there.
Yeah.
But I began to get uh, suspicious because I could not find a single image anywhere of it. Um, and it was, I could not get anything out of the AI other than some bad information. So, that's where the human comes in. That's the bottom line. And the client was
Or
gobsmacked.
Fable 5.
Yeah, yeah.
Just,
My
I'm not.
client,
I'm not trying to be a cheerleader. I'm just being
no, no, no.
a bit tongue
But
in
the
cheek right now.
client
But
was just shocked. They were like, "What do you mean?" And they didn't believe me at first. And I'm sitting there going, "Gosh, I hope I'm right." But it's the way it turned out. But and it really taught me a lesson that yes, AI is great. It's getting greater. It's going to get to be unbelievable, but you have to check. You have to be sure.
and I think, yeah, and I think that as it becomes more powerful, I think, I think, well, first of all, I'll back up by saying I've been saying over the course of the past few years now, since the beginning of this, we've got to change our mindset in the way that we approach this. The Intel mindset is not the AI mindset. It's not. We've got to be able to switch between the two, as necessary. So that's one thing. But I think, even having done that, um, it's really important for us, as we continue to use these tools and evolve, to guard against biases. So as we're looking at amazing things happening, right? I've literally prompted Claude to produce for me. But also, actually, in the webinar, people can see that an evaluation of AI and CI, and I asked it to produce it in HTML format that I can interact with, using a rubric, and scale of 1 to 5, et cetera,
Yeah.
et cetera. You saw the output; we just commented on it, and that's one example of a product. I created. I created a number of different surveys and so on. A lot of things that
Yeah.
just even sonnet level can produce pretty well. And but the thing is that as we start to do this, we start to become cognitively lazy. And a number of different early research are starting to bear that out. Right? People who are using AI
Yeah.
tools become cognitively dependent on using it, not
Yeah.
just in terms of relying on it to produce outputs, but in terms of even our motivations, that if AI conks out, we just tend to give up sooner, as opposed
Mhm.
to saying, all right, I'm just going to use my skills now because I've got it. So,
Right.
so it's a couple of different things, at least, that it can influence. And that was and then this is since we also understand too a lot of, there's something called technology bias, right, where people who harbor technology bias will be biased towards what technology can produce over what a human can produce, is
Mhm.
regardless of quality.
Mhm.
And so that is a real concern as it gets smarter and more impressive in this way, where literally something that would take me a week to produce, I created in under 5 minutes, right? In Claude. It's really easy to fall into the cognitive trap of being so impressed that we start to
Oh yeah.
seduced by it, and we believe it instead of remaining um, critical,
Yes.
right?
Well,
Applying critical thinking.
in this case, it gave so much information that it was like, well, of course it's true.
It's
You
false
know,
authority. Yeah.
I got all the data and all the information and what it's called. It didn't exist.
Yeah, it's false
So
authority. That's there, and so unless we have the subject matter expertise too,
right.
so this goes beyond the traditional human source collection too, where
Mhm.
before you can say, okay, I'm gathering intel from this the interviewee. I have to have enough to be able to conduct the interview, but I don't need super deep in some cases, to be able to reverse engineer anything, or to really assess what they have to say, for, say, for example, just reporting purposes, right?
Right.
But if we're relying on, obviously, on Gen AI to go deeper than that, and or in this case, Fable 5 is
Yeah.
literally creating a mock-up based on what's being described. You need the SME, the subject matter expert, to be able to come in
Right.
and validate that. That's
Right.
important. You also raised another question, though, in our earlier version of this conversation, where you brought up copyright.
Copyright.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
copyright concerns about, if when people are basically engineering
Mhm.
a mock-up based on what is being described.
Yeah.
And I find that to be really interesting. It's an interesting question, and I think this would be one where I wish we had an intellectual property attorney here,
Yeah.
not copyright patents. That's what you raised before, but an IP attorney to be able to help just talk about this, because I
Yeah.
would imagine that there are aspects of this that are uncharted.
Right. I'm sure there are. And, there's a lot of, you have to have ethics and you have to try to, make sure you are not going over that line. Um, there have been incidences where, and this isn't patent or anything, but, once upon a time I ran across um, a complete report on a competitor's plan for that year. In other words, it was from the year before, but it was what they were going to do that year. And you're looking at it and you're going, and it just came up on the internet. I didn't do anything else. I just said, I just put in the name of the company and a couple things, and there it is. And I'm like, well, I wonder if they actually did this. Can I at least try to figure that out? So you just have to you have to look at it and go, maybe I'm not going to use some of these things,
Well, yeah,
because
that's yeah, that kind of you have to be thinking more carefully about
yeah,
your ethical boundaries now. And this is where I think, you know, we're not prepared for this. When we're talking about ethical
yeah,
practices, ethical codes, at least I think in the Intel CI realm, I don't think that I can't think of any code that exists right now that really gets at this in a um, in a complete way. And
yeah,
I'm not, and I think that's always a discussion with the ethical codes is, how specific, do we want to get, but I think in terms of AI, it is going to cross the line in some ways and in ways that we haven't quite thought of. So I think for some people, when they're listening to the scenario that I described with Fable 5 and, and then the mock-up of the software is being created in real time,
yeah,
some people might be horrified and saying, well, that's unethical because you're taking something and you're literally generating something off of someone else's idea, regardless
yeah,
of whether or not it's patented, right? So that's, it's an ethical error, not necessarily even a legal discussion. Then there are other people who might say, well, this argument always existed, right? In human
mm,
intelligence, uh, is that, hey, if they're willing to talk about it, they're not under an NDA, it's fair game, right? So there's always that side too. And then there's another layer, which is that, for people who are in Intel generation, you're always thinking, and nowadays people are having a harder time sourcing. So when people are aware that as they're talking about this, you're going to have AI analyzing this, so recording is a whole other thing, right? Some people, even if they have
right,
problems being recorded, now you've got AI that's analyzing this in real time. Some people might be a bit spooked by that too. And now you're going to
yeah,
lose more people who are willing to talk with you, right? Because the
mm,
analysis becomes real time and more powerful. And so, what does that do to the pool of experts that you can consult with, right?
yeah,
Because for that's directly in the line of work that you've been in for the past few, you know.
yeah. I mean, there are, you have to respect trade secrets, and not commit lies and things like that would lead them to give you something they otherwise wouldn't give you. So there's a
Right.
lot about that you can work with, but I think if the machines are making the information available outside of your purview, in other words, how does could that information fall into the wrong hands if you're sitting there creating it as you go, and maybe there's a glitch and they get the information. So I think you have to be with any technology, you have to be a little bit skeptical and wary that you're not putting something like this thing that I found. It was just sitting there, I mean, they had actually made their whole plan for the next year, and it was the next year. Okay, so it was what they were thinking they were going to do, and somebody just stuck it up there. I don't know why. It's pretty
Yeah.
bad, but so I just looked at it and I thought, well, let's see if they did that. If they did it, it's not a trade secret, right? So it was a little bit helpful, but I knew I couldn't just say, hey, look at this. This is what they're
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah.
But it's I would be very, very careful about using that tool if it can be breached at all, because there's your product. You're probably going to spend money on it. You're gonna create product lines, and all this stuff is going to go into it, and then somebody's going to get a hold of it and beat you to it. This is not good.
Yeah, but say, let's just use a traditional process, right? Traditional practice. You get wind that someone, a competitor is developing a particular product, and you start calling suppliers for intel. And
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to get necessarily everything from a particular supplier, but you can maybe, like it's a quilt, right? You're putting together the pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're running it through an AI system. And it can certainly do it faster, but it might even be able to see some nuggets that you haven't been able to as a human, or you might have missed a few things, but it can get you there that much faster, at least get you 50% of the way there that much faster, right? So what I'm saying is that I think part of the challenge isn't a matter of using it or not using it, it's incremental.
Yeah.
Right? It's really, there are a lot of gray areas to this. There are facets to this that, some people might be comfortable with, others are not. We're not having enough of these discussions.
Yeah.
In fact, we're not even, I think, as a field, or multiple fields, right? Because I would even say, I want to broaden this, but just beyond Intel, it's insights work, it is uh, knowledge work as well.
Right.
Anything that's research and analysis based, really. And some are doing better than others, right? I think those who are in the healthcare sector, the life sciences, they're more advanced. They're thinking about this stuff because it's everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that most sectors are not prepared for this. We're pretty blinded. The blind spots are huge.
Yeah.
And then certainly in Intel, where we should be thought leaders on this, there really isn't enough discussions about leading edge, where it's headed, how it can be reshaped, how it can do this, right? The hows is missing in most of the discussions here, and which is what we're also trying
Right.
to fill here. Um, but I think that these are conversations we should have been having 3 years ago, and there's been a lot of lost time on this. Now we've got Fable 5, and
Yeah.
Fable 5 is just the dampened down version of Mythos, which can do even more.
Great.
And too many of us are still just focusing too much on prompting,
Yeah. And
or
so,
focusing too much on, on how to harness the basics of LLMs. Never mind the multimodal pieces.
right.
Or we're just focusing on the limited understanding of, there are, individual limited understanding of what AI is to Intel, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to, from the exercise you and I just did in the webinar, looking at the whole of it, taking stock of the big picture, saying, okay, overview, this is where it's good, this is where it's not good, this is where the capabilities are already here at a 4 or 5, but most people are actually practicing it and deploying it at a 1 or 2 level. So
Yeah.
that is a huge gap, right, between what AI is actually capable of doing and how we're actually using it. Because again, limiters are skills, right? Mindset, budget, time, very real, right? I'm not saying that this is a failure. We have these
Yeah.
very real limitations. So we're
Yeah.
struggling through
Yeah.
this, and we're struggling through this, and but I think that we need to be shifting our conversation, and we need to stop thinking about shorter term tactical application. To a degree, we have to do that. That's how we learn
Yeah.
incrementally and we expand. But we need to stop over indexing on that. And we need to start developing skill sets, right, beyond where we are today, or even beyond where it's going to be in 6 months or a year. We've got to start developing it. We've got to start really thinking about how Intel is going to look like
Mm-hmm.
under world models, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And when they
I'm
deploy the
waiting for
world model,
somebody to
yeah,
explain that to me.
when they start to deploy,
Yeah,
when that starts to roll out, right? And I am betting on the fact that it's a when, right? But when it begins, and granted, it'll be incremental. It'll be in very controlled environments, very targeted. It'll be in physics, or it'll be in something in which the rules are
yeah.
very tight. But it's going to expand. And so
Hmm.
when that begins, are we going to get caught short? We already know that this kind of thing is in development, right? There've already, been some, interesting
Yeah,
advances. So what are we doing right now to prepare for that? Meanwhile, some of us are putting all of our stakes on learning how to prompt. And I got to say, you know, we got to be thinking about the ROI of this. If we're putting tremendous amount of our budgets and time and attention on prompt level learning
yeah,
and literacy, then it means that we're not developing what is coming up in the 1 to 3 year window, and even with the LLMs and MMMs
yeah,
and agents. So we need to be thinking about how to think about this and how, building skills on a systemic level, right? Which is what that particular use case with Fable 5 tells me. Because
yeah.
that's really, it's not just what happened then in that phone call, or,
Mhm.
it's what that signifies in terms of how we need to prepare guardrails, right? The various
Right.
safeguards, in terms of defining the rules of engagement, redefining it,
Yeah,
redefining our roles, right? Just preparing, right?
yeah,
Building the requisite skill set to begin to prepare to manage that new practice. Because the worst case scenario for me, from Intel perspective, because a lot of worst case scenarios with AI, depending on what facet you're looking at, worst case
there
scenario
gonna be some.
would be that you have a decision maker